The forest was alive, though no birds sang. Branches swayed with the restless wind, and leaves whispered above the heads of the Navy SEAL team as they moved in a staggered formation through the thick undergrowth. Each man's boots pressed into soil damp from the night's rain, their footsteps nearly soundless against the spongy ground. To an outsider, they looked like shadows drifting through trees, faces masked in green and black paint, rifles raised in readiness. They had done this countless times before: silent infiltrations, long treks through hostile terrain, patience stretched into hours, but tonight felt different. Petty Officer Mason, the team's point man, scanned the path ahead through night vision goggles. The luminous green overlay distorted the world into shades of neon shadows, but it was better than blindness. He raised a clenched fist, and the team froze instantly. Somewhere in the distance, a faint crunch, too heavy to be an animal. Mason held his breath, waiting, listening. Seconds passed. Nothing. He gave a signal, and the team resumed, every sense sharpened. Behind him, Lieutenant Ross, the team leader, silently checked his GPS tablet. The small screen flickered, showing a shifting red dot that represented their location. The signal had already cut out twice in the last hour, and each time it returned, the margin of error widened. Technology was failing them, the thick canopy above choking radio waves and satellites. Ross didn't like it, but orders were orders. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the enemy-held forest, confirm reports of a weapons cache, and retreat undetected. But Ross knew from experience that simple in enemy territory usually meant anything but. The forest itself felt alive in a way that set his teeth on edge. It wasn't just the normal unease of a mission behind enemy lines. The air seemed heavier here, as though the ground had absorbed too much blood over the years and carried it like a memory. Moss-covered trunks rose like silent sentinels, and twisted roots reached out like skeletal hands across the path. Every branch snap echoed too loudly. Every rustle of leaves set hearts racing. The SEALs were veterans, hardened by countless operations. Yet even they couldn't ignore the way the forest seemed to breathe around them, as though it were watching, waiting. "Radio check," whispered Chief Petty Officer Delgado, his voice barely audible. "Nothing," replied Corporal Hayes from the rear. He tapped the side of his headset in frustration, but the only response was static. Ross muttered a curse under his breath. Communications were their lifeline. Without it, they were blind to headquarters, blind to reinforcements, blind to extraction. Still, he kept his voice calm when he spoke. "Stay sharp. We stick to the plan. Weapons cache is 1 click east." The men nodded, their discipline unshaken. Fear didn't make them reckless. It made them precise. They pressed forward. The deeper they went, the darker it grew. The forest canopy was so dense that even the moonlight struggled to break through, leaving only streaks of silver on the ground. It was the kind of darkness that pressed against the eyes, making it impossible to judge distance. The SEALs relied entirely on their NVGs, though even those flickered with interference, distorted by humidity. Mason, up front, raised his fist again. This time, everyone dropped instantly to the ground. Ahead, faint voices, guttural, foreign, and close. The team melted into the earth, bodies pressed flat against wet leaves and soil. The voices grew louder, punctuated by laughter. Enemy patrol. Ross held up 3 fingers. 3 hostiles. Mason sighted down his rifle, suppressor already fitted. 1 squeeze and it would be over. But Ross shook his head. No unnecessary engagements. Their mission was stealth, not bloodshed. They waited, motionless, as 3 silhouettes passed through the trees, rifles slung carelessly across their backs. Every heartbeat stretched into an eternity. Hayes, lying in the back, felt a bead of sweat slide down his temple and prayed it wouldn't splash loudly onto the ground. Delgado kept his finger lightly against the trigger, resisting the urge to fire. The patrol stopped only a few meters away, one of them turning his head toward the SEAL's position. His eyes scanned the darkness. Ross's breath caught in his throat. Then, as if bored, the man spat into the dirt and moved on. The patrol disappeared, swallowed by the forest. The SEALs didn't move for another full minute, until Ross finally gave the hand signal to continue. They rose silently, their movements smooth and practiced. Close call. Too close. The unease grew heavier. The forest seemed to be closing in, pushing them toward an unseen trap. The further east they traveled, the narrower the paths became, tangled with roots and low branches. Their night vision blurred with every shift of fog rolling in from the hills. The sound of running water echoed nearby, a stream they would need to cross. When they reached it, the current was stronger than expected, frothing against slick rocks. Mason waded across first, rifle raised high to keep it dry. The others followed, one by one. Halfway through, Delgado slipped, splashing loudly into the water. The sound carried like a gunshot in the silence. Everyone froze. From the far bank, Mason raised a hand, signaling them to hurry. Ross's gut tightened. He could feel it, eyes watching from somewhere beyond the trees. By the time the last man crossed, the forest had gone eerily silent. No insects chirped, no wind moved the leaves. It was the kind of silence that only came before violence. Ross whispered into his dead headset, more out of instinct than expectation. "Command, this is Echo Team. We're close to the site. Do you read?" Nothing but static. They pushed on. The forest thickened into an almost impenetrable wall of trunks and vines, forcing them to slow their pace. What should have been a 20-minute trek stretched into an hour. When they finally reached a ridge overlooking a clearing, Ross raised his binoculars. Even in the darkness, he could make out crude wooden structures, tarps stretched over supply crates, and armed guards pacing the perimeter. The intel had been right. A weapons cache sat nestled in the heart of the forest, guarded like treasure. But something else caught his eye. Movement. Dozens of men, far more than expected. The cache wasn't just a stockpile. It was a base of operations. Ross lowered the binoculars, his jaw tightening. We're outnumbered, heavily. Mason exhaled slowly. Extraction? Ross shook his head. No comes. No backup. We gather evidence, fall back, and pray we make it out. The men crouched low, cameras clicking silently as they documented the site. But deep down, Ross knew the forest had already claimed them. The enemy wasn't blind. The patrol earlier hadn't been careless. It had been bait. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the trees, the hunters were already circling. The SEALs didn't know it yet, but the ambush was only minutes away. The forest was no longer a place to pass through. It had become their cage. The first gunshot cracked through the forest like a thunderclap. It came from nowhere, sudden and brutal, snapping a branch inches above Delgado's head. He dove for cover instinctively, shouting, "Contact!" Before the echo died, the woods erupted in a storm of gunfire. Muzzle flashes burst like fireflies in the shadows, tracer rounds streaking in chaotic arcs across the trees. The SEALs reacted as one. Training overrode fear. Mason dropped to his stomach, returning fire in controlled bursts, his suppressor coughing quietly compared to the enemy's deafening rifles. Ross barked orders, voice sharp but steady. Spread, find cover. Defensive formation now. Bullets shredded bark, splintering trees into clouds of dust and wood chips. Hayes ducked behind a fallen log, the impact of rounds thudding against it like sledgehammers. They were waiting for us. He shouted, voice barely audible over the chaos. Ross knew he was right. The enemy had known their path, known their timing. This wasn't random resistance. This was an orchestrated ambush. His gut clenched. They'd walked straight into the trap. From the tree line, shadows poured forward. A dozen, then more. The attackers moved fast, their tactics coordinated, their fire disciplined. These weren't militia with old rifles. They were trained fighters, methodical in their advance. The SEALs were surrounded before they could react. Frag out. Delgado hurled a grenade toward the advancing line. The explosion shook the ground, tearing through brush and sending bodies sprawling. For a brief moment, the firing slowed, giving the SEALs precious seconds to reposition. Mason scrambled behind a cluster of rocks, breathing hard. His night vision lit up with movement. Too much movement. They're everywhere, LT. Ross slid beside him, firing 3 rounds in quick succession. Hold your ground. Tighten the perimeter. We don't give them the flank. But the enemy was already pressing both sides. Gunfire raked their position from multiple angles, forcing the SEALs lower. Each man picked targets carefully, conserving ammunition. Their suppressed rifles lacked the intimidation of noise, but their accuracy was lethal. A fighter fell with each shot, but for every one dropped, 2 more seemed to appear. The forest itself betrayed them. Every tree, every root, every shadow provided cover for the attackers. It felt as though the woods had conspired against them, offering hiding places to their enemies while leaving the SEALs exposed. A round tore through Hayes's sleeve, grazing his arm. He bit back a cry, pressing himself tighter against the ground. Delgado, only a few feet away, grabbed his radio again, desperation in his tone. "Command, this is Echo Team. We're under heavy fire. Immediate extraction." Static. Only static. Damn it. Delgado cursed, slamming the useless headset against his helmet. Another burst of enemy fire rattled the air. A grenade landed dangerously close, bouncing between roots. Ross's eyes widened. Grenade. The team hit the ground, covering their heads. The explosion ripped through the soil, showering them with dirt and leaves. One man groaned in pain, shrapnel cutting into his leg. Ross crawled to him, dragging the wounded SEAL behind a log. The injury wasn't fatal, but blood poured fast. He tore open a field dressing, pressing it against the wound. "Stay with me," he urged, eyes flicking between the injury and the battlefield. Everywhere he looked, the forest lit up with gunfire. The enemy was relentless, firing from the trees, from ridges, from the very shadows. The SEALs were pinned, their path forward cut off, their escape route sealed. "We need to move," Mason shouted over the din, firing another burst. "They'll box us in." Ross scanned the terrain, his mind racing. Retreat wasn't an option. The river was behind them, and the enemy controlled it. Forward was suicide, the clearing swarming with hostiles. Their only chance was to hold the line, to wait for an opening. But deep down, Ross knew waiting too long would mean death. The ambush wasn't just about killing them. The enemy wanted to trap them, lead them out slowly. A sharp whistle pierced the night, a signal. The enemy fire intensified, a coordinated push. Dozens of rifles thundered at once, the volume of fire so heavy it drowned out everything else. Bullets chewed through logs, punched into rocks, ricocheted in deadly sparks. The SEALs pressed themselves flat, barely daring to move. Hayes shouted, "We can't hold this, LT." Ross gritted his teeth, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He knew they were right. The math didn't add up. 6 SEALs against dozens, cut off, surrounded, low on ammo. Survival wasn't a likelihood. It was a miracle they were still alive. Still, surrender wasn't in their vocabulary. Fight smart. Ross barked. Pick your targets. Make them count. The team obeyed. Each SEAL fired with precision, dropping enemy fighters with headshots and chest shots, every bullet deliberate. They moved in pairs, covering each other, shifting positions constantly to avoid being pinned. Years of training and discipline kept them alive where lesser men would have broken. But the pressure was unrelenting. Through his scope, Mason spotted an enemy machine gun nest being set up on a ridge, a belt-fed monster that would cut them to ribbons. He cursed under his breath, squeezing off a burst. One enemy fell, but the gun was already being loaded. "They've got a heavy weapon," he shouted. Ross's eyes narrowed. If that gun opened up, their position would be shredded in seconds. Delgado. Grenade launcher, now. Delgado popped up, firing a 40mm round. The grenade arced through the air, exploding against the ridge. The machine gun nest vanished in a cloud of fire and dirt. For a brief instant, the SEALs felt a surge of triumph, quickly drowned by the sound of more boots pounding through the forest. Reinforcements. The SEALs exchanged grim looks. There were too many. Ross's mind raced, searching for a solution. They had to survive long enough for extraction, but without comms, no one even knew they were alive. Their only chance was to outlast the ambush, to force the enemy to make mistakes. But the attackers weren't amateurs. They were disciplined, patient, and confident. Pinned against the forest floor, Ross felt a sinking realization. The mission was no longer about intel. It was about survival. Every instinct told him they wouldn't all make it out. The forest, silent hours ago, was now alive with the roar of war. Smoke drifted between the trees, illuminated by the flashes of gunfire. The air stank of gunpowder, blood, and sweat. The SEALs were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from the world. And as the enemy closed in tighter, one thought echoed in Ross's mind. They weren't meant to leave this forest alive. The forest stank of blood and smoke. The SEALs crouched behind what cover they could find, pinned in place by relentless fire. Each burst of bullets sent bark exploding, dirt spitting into their faces. Hours had passed since the ambush began, though time had lost all meaning. Every minute stretched like a lifetime. The men were exhausted, but exhaustion was a luxury they couldn't afford. Lieutenant Ross crouched beside the injured SEAL, checking the field dressing again. The bleeding had slowed, but hadn't stopped. The man, Johnson, their communications tech, clenched his jaw, sweat dripping down his pale face. He didn't complain, didn't whimper. But Ross knew the truth. Johnson couldn't move on his own. Carrying him would slow the entire team. Ross refused to let that thought linger. No one gets left behind. Delgado fired another controlled burst, dropping 2 advancing figures. His ammo counter blinked in his visor, reminding him he had only 3 magazines left. He ducked back behind the log, cursing under his breath. "We're running dry, LT. Can't hold forever." Ross met his eyes. Calm, steady, even if his stomach churned. "We don't need forever. We just need long enough." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Long enough for what? Extraction? Reinforcements? Nobody even knew where they were anymore. Their radios were dead, their signals jammed, and their escape cut off. Long enough might just mean surviving until the enemy decided to finish the job. Mason crawled up beside them, his chest heaving. "They're trying to flank left. I spotted 3 circling wide. If they get around us, it's over." Ross nodded grimly. "Take Hayes, cut them off. Don't let them box us in." Mason tapped Hayes on the shoulder. Both men slipped into the darkness, moving low and fast. Their footsteps blended with the chaos, invisible hunters in a forest of predators. Seconds later, muffled gunfire cracked, followed by a strangled cry. Mason returned, dragging Hayes by the arm. Hayes's face was twisted in pain, blood soaking through his sleeve. "Got two," Mason reported, breathing hard. "Third one clipped Hayes before I dropped him." Hayes grinned weakly, though his teeth were stained with blood. "Still prettier than you, Mason." The men chuckled, even in the midst of chaos. Humor, however grim, was their armor. It kept fear at bay, if only for a heartbeat. But the laughter died as another hail of bullets raked their position. Delgado ducked just in time, a round slamming into the log where his head had been. He swore and jammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. The enemy fire never slowed. They were methodical, disciplined, firing in waves to keep the SEALs pinned. Every time Ross peeked over cover, he saw new silhouettes slipping between the trees, tightening the noose. "They're not rushing us," Mason muttered. "They're bleeding us out." Ross knew he was right. The enemy wasn't interested in a quick firefight. They wanted to suffocate the SEALs, drain their ammo, break their will. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. Every silence between volleys was worse than the bullets. A crushing, suffocating quiet filled only by the rustle of leaves and the faint groans of the wounded. Hours crawled by. Ammunition dwindled to desperation levels. Delgado counted his last few rounds, shaking his head. 2 mags left. After that, knives and prayers. Ross pressed a hand against the dirt, steadying himself. His men were looking to him, their eyes searching for strength. He couldn't falter. "Not now. We hold. We don't break. We make them pay for every step." The forest answered with another burst of gunfire, rounds slamming so close that Johnson flinched despite his injuries. His pale lips moved, whispering something. A prayer, maybe. Ross couldn't hear it over the chaos. Hayes grunted, pulling the pin from his last grenade. "If I'm going down, I'm taking a few with me." "No one's going down," Ross snapped, his tone sharp. He grabbed Hayes's wrist, forcing him to hold the grenade. "You throw that only when I say." "Understood?" Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, LT." Another hour passed. The SEALs rotated fire, one man shooting while the others reloaded or bandaged wounds. Their bodies ached, throats dry, ears ringing from the endless barrage. Yet they endured, because that's what SEALs did. Still, the cracks were showing. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he loaded his last magazine. Hayes's bleeding arm weakened his aim. Delgado's shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with fatigue. Even Ross felt it, the creeping doubt, the question clawing at the back of his mind. What if this is where it ends? But outwardly, he remained stone. He had to. The forest suddenly fell silent again. No gunfire. No footsteps. Only the heavy breathing of the SEALs and the distant rustle of leaves. Mason's eyes darted to Ross. Why'd they stop? Delgado swallowed hard. They're planning something. Ross raised a hand, signaling silence. The team held their breath, straining to listen. Then, faintly, the sound of shovels. Digging. Ross's stomach dropped. "Mortar," he whispered. The realization hit them like a punch. The enemy wasn't just waiting. They were preparing to rain explosives down on their position, to bury the SEALs alive beneath the forest floor. "We have to move," Mason hissed. Ross clenched his jaw. Moving meant exposure. Staying meant annihilation. Neither option promised survival. He looked at his men, bloodied, exhausted, but unbroken. They were SEALs. They didn't quit. They didn't surrender. "We move on my mark," Ross ordered quietly. "Stay tight." Suppressing fire, and we shift position to higher ground. If they want this ridge, they'll have to earn it. Delgado smirked faintly, loading his last magazine. About damn time. The silence shattered again as Ross gave the signal. The SEALs opened fire with everything they had left, bullets cutting into the tree line, forcing the enemy to duck. Then they moved, dragging Johnson between them, sprinting through mud and blood, hearts pounding as tracer rounds sliced past. For a moment, it worked. They gained ground, pulling themselves toward a slope that promised a better defensive position. Hope flickered, fragile, but real. Then the forest erupted. Mortar screamed overhead, exploding behind them, shaking the earth with bone-rattling force. The shockwave knocked Hayes off his feet, his helmet flying. Mason yanked him back up, dragging him forward as more shells pounded the ground. The forest was on fire. But still, the SEALs moved. They had no choice but to hold. No choice but to fight. Because surrender wasn't in their blood. And though the night was far from over, every man knew one truth. They were alive, and the night had turned into a crucible of fire and fear. The SEALs were pressed flat against the forest floor, pinned by mortar blasts and endless waves of gunfire. Smoke curled between the trees, glowing faintly in the flashes of explosions. Their ears rang, their throats burned, and their weapons felt lighter with every shot. Not because the rifles grew easier to lift, but because their magazines were almost empty. Ross's world had narrowed to two truths: hold the line and pray for a miracle. But miracles were rare in war. Then it happened. A single rifle crack split the air, sharp, precise, different from the chaotic rhythm of the battle. It wasn't the sound of their suppressed M4 South. It wasn't the echo of enemy fire. It was cleaner, sharper, final. An enemy machine gunner, the one who had been pouring fire from the ridge, jerked violently and collapsed, his helmet tumbling into the mud. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. "What the?" Mason muttered, lowering his rifle. Another shot rang out. A scout leaning out from behind a tree slumped forward, a crimson spray painting the trunk behind him. The SEALs exchanged stunned looks. None of them had fired. Who the hell? Delgado whispered. Ross's mind raced. A sniper, but whose? The enemy, caught off guard, scrambled to locate the source. Shouts in a foreign tongue echoed through the trees, frantic, panicked. They fired blindly into the darkness, tracer rounds lighting up branches and leaves, but their bullets hit nothing. Whoever had fired those shots was already gone from that position, melted into the forest like a ghost. Ross felt the hairs on his neck rise. Whoever this was, they weren't just good. They were professional. Another crack, another kill. This time, a mortar operator fell backward, his shell rolling harmlessly into the mud. The pressure on the SEALs eased slightly. The team breathed, if only for a second. "Someone's covering us," Hayes said, his voice hushed with awe. Ross kept his rifle trained on the tree line, eyes darting between the flashes of gunfire. He wanted to believe it. He needed to believe it. But in war, all eyes didn't appear out of nowhere. Reinforcements were planned, calculated. This was something else. "Don't assume anything," Ross warned, but his voice lacked its usual edge. Deep down, hope stirred in his chest. The sniper struck again, and again. Each shot was surgical, deliberate. Not just random targets, high-value ones. The men pinning down the SEALs, the ones coordinating attacks, the gunners who suppressed movement. Each time the enemy thought they had control, another of their key fighters dropped. Delgado grinned despite the chaos. "Whoever she is, I owe her a drink." "She?" Mason asked, blinking through sweat. Delgado shrugged, firing another burst. "Just a feeling. No man I've met shoots that clean." Ross didn't correct him. Gender didn't matter. What mattered was that someone, some unseen guardian, was buying them precious time. The enemy began to falter. Their fire, once coordinated, grew erratic. They shouted over one another, confusion rippling through their ranks. They fired at shadows, searching for the phantom who haunted the tree line. Ross seized the moment. "Shift position," he ordered. The SEALs dragged Johnson with them, crawling toward higher ground. With the enemy distracted, they moved faster than they had in hours, hearts pounding with renewed energy. Then, from somewhere beyond the smoke, another rifle shot cracked. A squad leader crumpled mid-shout. Hayes laughed, a short, breathless sound. "It's like she's reading their playbook." Ross didn't laugh. He was too busy studying the battlefield, piecing together what was happening. He'd been in enough firefights to know luck when he saw it, and this wasn't luck. This was skill. Whoever this sniper was, they weren't just saving them. They were dismantling the ambush, piece by piece. Eyes open, Ross muttered to his team. "She's good, but don't rely on ghosts. We finished this fight ourselves." Still, he couldn't deny the truth. Without those timely shots, they'd already be dead. As if to prove his thought, another crack echoed. A rifleman who had crept dangerously close to Hayes dropped instantly, his body tumbling down the slope. Hayes shot a quick glance toward the trees, his grin fading into awe. "Feels like she's watching us," he murmured. Ross tightened his grip on his rifle. He wasn't sure if that comforted him or terrified him. The enemy regrouped, furious and desperate. Their volume of fire doubled, bullets shredding the air around the SEALs. But it no longer had the same weight. For every push they made, another leader fell. For every attempt to flank, the phantom rifle cracked and ended it. Minutes bled into an hour. The SEALs held, bolstered by their unseen ally. They moved smarter, more confidently, seizing every opportunity the sniper carved open. Delgado whispered encouragements under his breath, his grin sharper each time an enemy dropped. Mason muttered thanks into the dirt after every close save. Ross, however, stayed silent. His mind churned. Snipers didn't just appear in battles like this. Was she attached to another unit? Had command center? Or was she working alone, drawn here by chance? None of those answers made sense. And yet, here she was. The turning point came when a heavy gunner emerged from the tree line, his weapon blazing. The SEALs ducked, pinned again, dirt and bark exploding around them. Then came the shot. One single perfect shot. The gunner dropped, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. Silence followed, not from the sniper, but from the enemy. The fighters hesitated, their momentum broken. In the space of that heartbeat, the battlefield shifted. Ross exhaled, his chest tight. "Whoever you are," he thought silently, "keep shooting." And somewhere out there, unseen in the smoke and shadows, the sniper adjusted her scope, chambered her next round, and lined up another kill. The SEALs didn't know her name. They hadn't seen her face. But every man there knew one truth. They were no longer alone in the forest. The forest was no longer just a battlefield. It had become a stage for something far stranger, something almost mythical. The SEALs, pressed against the mud and battered by hours of relentless fire, had felt the noose tightening around their throats. Then the phantom sniper arrived, her rifle cracks slicing the night open like a scalpel. Still, no one dared to relax. Every soldier knew one shot could tilt the battle, but one mistake could erase it all. Ross crouched behind a shattered tree trunk, the acrid stench of gunpowder clinging to his skin. His heart pounded as he reloaded the last of his magazines. Each click of the bolt felt louder than thunder. Somewhere out there, their silent guardian adjusted her sights. Another shot rang out. It wasn't just a kill, it was a message. The target was a machine gunner, a linchpin in the enemy's defense. The man had been chewing up the clearing with bursts of fire, preventing any movement from the SEALs. Now he was sprawled backward, weapon silent, his comrades shouting in alarm. The effect was immediate. The enemy line wavered. Ross saw it, the slight break, the stutter in their rhythm. These weren't disciplined, faceless soldiers anymore. They were human, rattled, afraid of a ghost they couldn't see. "She's cutting their spine," Hayes breathed, his voice low with awe. Ross didn't answer. He couldn't let himself believe they were saved just yet. But deep down, a pulse of hope flickered. The sniper struck again. A squad leader barking orders dropped mid-sentence, his words cut off in a spray of crimson. His men froze, leaderless, their formation crumbling. "Hell yes," Delgado hissed, slamming a fresh mag into his rifle. "That's how you do it." The SEALs felt the shift. Their bodies, drained from hours of defense, found new strength. The heavy weight of helplessness lifted, just enough for them to breathe. Ross made a quick decision. "On me." We used the break. Crawling through the underbrush, the team shifted their position, dragging Johnson's wounded frame along with them. Each move was risky, each footfall too loud, but the sniper's cover was relentless. Every enemy who tried to flank was silenced. Every burst of gunfire aimed at their path was answered with a crack from the shadows. For the first time in hours, Ross wasn't reacting, he was planning. They reached a small ridge, higher ground with a better angle on the battlefield. From here, Ross could see the panic spreading through the enemy lines. Men darted between trees, shouting to one another, firing into the dark where they thought the shots were coming from. But they were wrong every time. "She's moving," Mason whispered, eyes scanning. "Every shot's from a different spot. She's playing them like a fiddle." Ross nodded. It wasn't just her accuracy. It was her discipline. A lesser sniper would have been tracked down by now, caught by muzzle flash or sound. But she stayed one step ahead, never firing twice from the same perch. She was invisible, untouchable. The SEALs opened fire, seizing the moment. Delgado's rifle barked. Mason laid down suppressive bursts. Hayes kept Johnson stable while still covering their flank. For the first time, they weren't prey. They were hunters. Still, Ross knew it wasn't over. The enemy was resilient, their numbers overwhelming. They rallied quickly, fueled by rage. And when they realized they couldn't pin down the sniper, they shifted focus back to the SEALs. Gunfire poured toward the ridge, snapping branches, chewing the ground. The SEALs ducked low, pinned again. Then another crack. This one was different. Louder, closer. It wasn't just another shot. It was a declaration. A sniper duel. An enemy marksman had entered the fight. Ross felt it instantly. The silence after that shot was heavier, dangerous. Snipers hunted differently. This wasn't about spraying bullets. It was about patience, precision, outthinking the other. The SEALs held their breath, waiting. Minutes passed. Then another shot cracked. Not from the enemy, but from their phantom ally. Somewhere far to the left, a faint cry echoed. The enemy sniper, hit clean through the chest. Delgado whistled low. She just took out their ace. Hayes shook his head in disbelief. She's not just good. She's lethal. Ross's jaw tightened. Whoever she was, she had just saved them from certain death. And not with luck, with mastery. But the battle wasn't finished. The enemy, furious at losing their sniper, launched a full assault. Dozens surged through the trees, firing wildly, their shouts shaking the night. The ground trembled under the charge. Ross shouted over the chaos. "Hold the line." The SEALs fired until their rifles smoked, every bullet precise. But the wave kept coming. They were too many, too fast. Then the sniper changed tactics. She stopped picking isolated targets and began cutting paths, clearing gaps in the enemy rush. Her bullets carved lanes of survival, dropping the men closest to breaching the SEALs' defenses. Each crack gave the team seconds to reload, seconds to breathe. Ross saw the brilliance. She wasn't just killing. She was shaping the battlefield. Delgado laughed between bursts of gunfire. "She's running the show, boss." Ross didn't deny it. Whoever she was, she had become the keystone of their survival. Minutes stretched into eternity. The enemy, bleeding bodies with every advance, began to falter again. Their war cries dimmed. Their lines broke. Men stumbled back into the forest, dragging the wounded. Some simply dropped their weapons and fled. The clearing fell into a tense silence, broken only by the labored breathing of the SEALs. Smoke hung thick in the air, glowing faintly in the pale light of the moon. The ground was littered with bodies, spent shells, and broken branches. Ross lowered his rifle slowly, scanning. His instincts screamed that it wasn't over, but for now, the storm had passed. Hayes let out a ragged laugh, collapsing onto the dirt. "We're still alive. Because of her." Mason wiped blood from his cheek, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't even know her name." Delgado grinned, teeth flashing in the dark. "Doesn't matter. She's the angel of death, and she's on our side." Ross didn't smile. He just stared into the tree line, where somewhere beyond the smoke, their phantom sniper watched, waited, and prepared for the next move. The SEALs were battered, bleeding, and out of ammo, but they weren't broken. And for the first time since the ambush began, Ross believed they might just make it out alive. The forest had fallen into an uneasy silence. Smoke curled upward in thin, ghostly ribbons, drifting between the trees like spirits lingering over the dead. The SEALs crouched low, weapons hot, lungs burning, ears ringing. They had survived the ambush by sheer grit and the intervention of a stranger whose rifle cracked with the precision of fate. But Ross knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. They were still outnumbered, still wounded, and still cornered deep in hostile terrain. Yet something had shifted. A balance of fear no longer leaned against them. Now, the enemy had tasted the sharp edge of doubt. It began slowly. One enemy soldier peeked from behind a tree, scanning for movement. The forest was still, save for the faint rustle of wind through branches. He edged forward, rifle raised. A crack split the night. He fell without a sound. A neat hole drilled through his helmet. The SEALs flinched, but it wasn't fear that passed through them this time. It was awe. "She's still out there," Mason whispered. Ross didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, watching, listening. Minutes stretched. Then another shot. Another soldier dropped. The sniper wasn't spraying random fire. She was choosing her targets with ruthless calculation, moving unseen between shots. It wasn't just killing. It was dismantling. One by one. Every man she struck wasn't just an enemy. He was someone who held a position, someone whose death carved a hole in their formation. A scout, a flanker, a man trying to rally his comrades. Each loss rippled outward, sowing chaos. The SEALs, battered and low on ammo, held their ground. They fired only when necessary, conserving bullets. But they didn't have to fire often. The sniper's invisible hand shaped the fight. Delgado peered through the scope of his rifle, shaking his head in disbelief. "She's not fighting them. She's hunting them." Hayes gave a tired grin. "Feels like she's writing their obituary, one bullet at a time." The enemy felt it too. Their shouts grew louder, desperate, each command sharper, more panicked. They no longer advanced with the same confidence. They hesitated at the tree line, scanning shadows, fingers trembling on their triggers. Ross recognized it, the shift from predator to prey. Still, he stayed cautious. Desperation made men dangerous. And desperate they became. A squad of 5 rushed forward, screaming, rifles blazing. The SEALs braced for impact. Bullets shredded bark, chipped rock, sparked against metal. Ross fired. Delgado and Mason joined in, their gunfire holding the squad at bay. Then came the shot. One soldier in the squad jerked backward mid-stride, collapsing into the mud. His comrades faltered. Another shot. A second man spun and fell. The squad broke, stumbling back into the shadows. Only 3 survived, dragging the fallen into the tree line, their screams vanishing into the dark. The SEALs exhaled. "She's bleeding them out," Ross muttered. His tone wasn't admiration, it was calculation. Whoever this sniper was, she wasn't just saving them. She was unraveling the enemy's will to fight. Hours crawled by. The moon climbed higher, silver light cutting through gaps in the canopy. The battlefield had transformed. What began as an ambush was now a massacre, not of the SEALs, but of their hunters. The sniper never revealed herself, never gave a glimpse. Only her shot spoke. Each crack was followed by silence, then by the slump of another body into the dirt. It became psychological warfare. The enemy started firing wildly into the darkness, convinced she lurked behind every tree. Bullets riddled the forest floor, sparking off stones, but struck nothing. The SEALs listened, grimly amused. Their invisible ally had driven their attackers into paranoia. Mason chuckled under his breath. "She's not just killing them. She's breaking their minds." Delgado grinned, teeth flashing white in the moonlight. "Hell, I'm scared of her, and she's on our side." Ross remained quiet. He understood the weight of what was happening. Wars weren't just won with firepower. They were won with fear. And right now, the enemy feared the shadows more than the SEALs in front of them. But Ross also knew fear made men unpredictable. Near dawn, the forest erupted again. The enemy made another push, their shouts echoing, their rifles blazing. Exhaustion burned in the SEALs' muscles, but they dug in, firing back with what little ammunition they had left. And the sniper struck in rhythm. Crack. A grenadier fell, his live grenade rolling harmlessly down a slope. Crack. A radio operator dropped mid-scream. His call for reinforcements cut short. Crack. A squad leader collapsed, the morale of his men shattering with him. One by one, the battlefield became a graveyard of leaders and specialists. The rank-and-file fighters, deprived of direction, began to falter, shooting less, retreating more. The SEALs seized the chance. Delgado opened fire in controlled bursts. Mason picked off exposed targets. Hayes guarded Johnson with grim determination. Each of them knew their lives now hinged on the rhythm of that phantom rifle. By sunrise, the forest was littered with bodies. The enemy no longer advanced. Their numbers had thinned. Their courage bled out of them with every sniper shot. Silence settled. A heavy, fragile silence. Ross rose slowly from behind cover, rifle ready, scanning. His breath misted in the pale light of morning. Nothing moved. The enemy was gone. The sniper had taken them apart, methodically, one by one. The SEALs collapsed into exhaustion, some laughing, some shaking, some simply staring at the ground as if unsure they were still alive. Hayes let out a ragged breath. "We should be dead." But she, he gestured toward the tree line. She turned the whole damn war on its head. Delgado, leaning back against a rock, grinned. "Angel of death. That's what I'm calling her." Mason chuckled wearily. "More like a ghost. Didn't even see her once." Ross stayed silent. His eyes were still fixed on the tree line. Because while the sniper had saved them, He couldn't shake the feeling she was still there, watching. And that thought chilled him more than the memory of the ambush itself. For if she could save them so effortlessly, she could just as easily kill them. The forest remained quiet, but to Ross it was no longer the same forest. It had become her domain, and they were merely survivors passing through. One by one, she had broken the enemy. And one by one, she had reminded the seals of something they had almost forgotten in the chaos of battle. War wasn't about numbers. War was about precision. And precision had a name they did not yet know. The first light of dawn crept through the trees, slicing thin beams into the smoke-choked forest. The seals crouched low in the clearing, bruised, bloodied, and drained to the marrow of their bones. For hours they had been pinned, strangled by enemy fire. Their survival owed only to the invisible rifle cracks that had punctured the night. Now the battlefield was still, too still. Ross scanned the tree line, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion weighing on him. He had learned long ago that silence in war wasn't safety. It was the breath before the storm. And sure enough, the storm came. Shouts echoed across the forest, dozens of voices rallying. The enemy wasn't broken yet. What remained of their force, angry, desperate, vengeful, surged toward the clearing in one final assault. The ground shook with their advance. Bullets began to hammer the ridge, tearing bark, spitting dirt, pinging off rock. The air was alive again with fire and fury. "Here we go," Delgado shouted, slamming a fresh mag into his rifle. Mason braced beside him, knuckles white on his weapon. Hayes tightened his grip on Johnson, keeping the wounded man shielded. Ross steadied his breathing, raising his rifle. He had nothing left but grit and instinct. And that had always been enough. The enemy closed in, a dark tide crashing through the forest. The seals fired back, short bursts to conserve ammo, but they couldn't match the volume. The air was thick with lead, the roar of rifles deafening. And then, the crack. That single perfect sound. One enemy fell mid-charge, dropping into the dirt. Another shot followed, then another. Each crack was like punctuation in the chaos, every shot a scalpel, cutting the enemy's momentum apart. The phantom sniper was still with them. Ross seized the moment. Push forward. Don't let them regroup. The SEALs surged out of cover, adrenaline surging through veins heavy with fatigue. Their boots pounded mud and blood as they advanced, rifles barking. For the first time in this nightmare, they weren't retreating. They weren't hiding. They were fighting. The sniper's cover was relentless. Every time the SEALs exposed themselves, a shot silenced the enemy aiming at them. Every time the line threatened to collapse, another crack broke it apart. It was as if she were reading the battlefield through their eyes, anticipating every danger before it could strike. Delgado whooped as he dropped an enemy fighter. "This is it, boys. This is our break." Mason gritted his teeth, firing in rhythm with her cracks. "She's cutting the path. We just have to walk it." Ross kept moving, his rifle barking controlled bursts. He could feel it, the shift. The enemy's fire grew less organized, less confident. Their war cries turned into shouts of panic. Every step forward was wrested from them with blood and bullets, but every step was progress. The forest itself seemed to roar with the battle, birds scattering in panicked flocks, branches splintering under fire, smoke clinging thick like a curtain. But through it all, the sniper's calm precision guided them. One by one, the enemy fighters began to fall back. Not in order, not as soldiers, but as broken men fleeing a predator they couldn't fight. Ross's instincts sharpened. He knew this was their chance, not just to survive, but to end it. "Keep pushing," he barked. "We break them here, or we die here." The SEALs rallied, their exhaustion burned away by raw survival. Delgado fired until his rifle steamed. Mason advanced with steady bursts. Hayes snarled as he laid down fire, even while half supporting Johnson's weight. They were a battered team, but still a team. And above them, around them, unseen but ever present, the sniper was their shield and their sword. The enemy faltered. Their charge broke against the SEALs' advance, splintered by the sniper's killing rhythm. Men stumbled back, some dropping weapons, some dragging the wounded, some simply running into the trees. The tide had turned. Ross knew it wasn't luck. It wasn't even just skill. It was synergy. Somehow, in this chaos, the SEALs and the unseen sniper had become one unit, fighting as though they had trained together for years. She cut the openings, and they exploited them. She closed the gaps, and they pressed forward. By mid-morning, the clearing was theirs. The ground was a scarred graveyard of the night's violence. Smoke still curled upward. The bodies of enemy fighters littered among shattered trees. The silence that followed was not fragile this time. It was final. The last of the attackers had fled. The forest belonged to the SEALs again. The men collapsed where they stood, chests heaving, rifles hanging loose in tired hands. Delgado dropped onto a log, sweat dripping from his brow. We, actually, did it? Mason sat beside him, laughing breathlessly. We? More like she did it. We were just the lucky bastards behind her scope. Hayes leaned against a rock, keeping Johnson steady. I don't care who she is. She's the only reason we're breathing. Ross didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line, his rifle still ready. Somewhere out there, their phantom ally watched. He could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. She hadn't shown herself, not once, not even in their hour of victory. She remained a shadow, a whisper, a crack of thunder in the silence. Delgado raised his head, calling into the trees. Hey, sniper. You out there? You just saved a squad of SEALs? Least you could do is say hello. No answer. Only the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Ross exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. Whoever she was, she hadn't fought for recognition. She hadn't fought for thanks. She had fought because it needed to be done. But still, a part of him burned with curiosity. Because a soldier like that didn't appear by chance. The SEALs began to regroup, tending to wounds, gathering what little ammo they had left. They were alive against all odds. And they owed it to a ghost. Ross finally lowered his rifle, but his eyes stayed on the tree line. He knew the fight wasn't over yet, not until extraction. But for now, for this fragile morning, they had done the impossible. They had turned the tide. The forest lay broken under the pale light of morning. Smoke clung to the clearing like a heavy veil, and the smell of gunpowder and iron lingered in every breath. The SEALs stood among the ruins of the night, battered and bruised, but alive. Against all odds, they had survived the ambush. Yet the silence was unnerving. It wasn't the calm of victory, but the emptiness after a storm. Ross stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on the tree line. His team slumped behind him, Delgado laughing between gasps, Mason sitting with his rifle across his lap, Hayes tending Johnson's wounds with hands that shook from exhaustion. But Ross couldn't relax. Not yet, because their savior still hadn't revealed herself. He knew she was there. He could feel her watching. The hairs on the back of his neck bristled with every passing second. Whoever she was, she had stayed hidden through the worst firefight of their lives. She hadn't come forward after the ambush collapsed, hadn't responded to Delgado's shouts, hadn't claimed any recognition. That kind of discipline didn't come from pride. It came from training, and from choice. A crackle of static broke through the tension. Hayes's radio hissed, then came alive with a distorted voice. Guardian 2-1, this is Falcon. Do you copy? Ross snatched the radio. Relief surged through him. Falcon, this is Guardian 2-1. Copy loud and clear. We need immediate extraction. Coordinates uploading now. Roger that, Guardian. Birds are inbound. Ada, 40 minutes. Hold tight. 40 minutes. Ross exhaled slowly. 40 minutes between survival and safety. The men slumped further at the news. The thought of evacuation, of leaving this hell behind, was enough to draw weary smiles. But Ross's eyes stayed locked on the trees. He spoke quietly, as if only for himself. Where are you? Minutes passed in silence. The men busied themselves with makeshift defenses, gathering ammo from fallen enemies, treating wounds. The forest around them remained still, as if holding its breath. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the tree line. At first, she was a silhouette against the rising sun. Tall, poised, her rifle slung across her chest with a grace that spoke of long familiarity. She walked with calm precision, every step deliberate, every motion controlled. The SEALs froze. Delgado blinked, then broke into a grin. Well, I'll be damned. As she drew closer, details sharpened. A ghillie suit draped over her shoulders, streaked with mud and leaves. Her face was streaked with grime, but her eyes, sharp, cold, unwavering, were untouched by fatigue. The long barrel of her sniper rifle gleamed faintly in the morning light. A woman, their ghost. She stopped a few feet from the SEALs, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak at first. She simply studied them, as if measuring, evaluating, deciding. Ross stepped forward, rifle lowered, but grip steady. For the first time in hours, he felt like he was no longer in control of the battlefield. You saved our lives, he said, his voice even. Who are you? Her eyes flicked to him, then to the rest of his team. When she spoke, her voice was low, calm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much war. Call me Raven. Delgado let out a short laugh. Raven? Figures. Sounds about right for an angel of death. She didn't smile. She didn't react at all. She simply adjusted the strap on her rifle and glanced at Johnson, who lay pale but breathing under Hayes's care. You need extraction, she said, not as a question, but a fact. Ross narrowed his eyes. You're not attached to us. What unit are you with? Raven's gaze held his for a long moment before she answered. Does it matter? The silence that followed was heavy. Ross knew she was right. Without her, they'd all be dead. Whatever her background, whatever her story, it had saved them. Mason broke the tension with a tired laugh. Don't care if she's with the Girl Scouts. She's the reason we're alive. Raven's expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the same calm mask. They waited together in the clearing, the minutes crawling toward extraction. Raven stayed on the outskirts, never sitting, never lowering her guard. Her rifle remained in her hands, scope scanning the tree line. Ross studied her when she wasn't looking. Every movement was deliberate, every pause calculated. She didn't waste energy. She didn't let down her guard. She was more than skilled. She was seasoned. A veteran of shadows. When the distant thump of rotor blades finally echoed across the sky, the SEALs cheered weakly. Relief washed through them like a tide. The helicopters burst through the canopy, blades chopping the air, sending leaves scattering. Dust and smoke swirled as they descended into the clearing. The SEALs moved quickly, dragging Johnson onto a stretcher, securing their gear. Raven moved with them, though she kept her distance, as if ready to vanish the moment she was no longer needed. At the ramp of the Black Hawk, Ross paused. He turned to her, his voice raised over the roar of blades. You coming with us? For the first time, Raven hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the forest, then back to Ross. No, she said simply. My fight's not over. Delgado frowned, stepping forward. What fight? You could walk onto that bird with us, disappear, never have to fire another round out here. Raven cut him off with a glance. Not sharp, not cruel, just final. This is where I belong. Ross studied her, his jaw tight. He wanted to press, wanted to demand answers. But he saw it in her eyes, the weight of choice, the burden of someone who had long ago traded safety for duty. He nodded once. Then I hope we meet again. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her gaze. Respect. Then she turned, stepping back toward the tree line as the Black Hawk's engines roared. The seals boarded, exhaustion collapsing over them like a wave. The bird lifted, rising above the shattered forest, carrying them away from death. Through the open door, Ross caught one last glimpse of Raven. She stood at the tree line, rifle in hand, watching them go. Alone, a ghost in the morning light. As the helicopter banked east, the forest swallowed her once more. The seals sat in silence, the weight of survival heavy on their shoulders. Delgado leaned back, grinning faintly despite his fatigue. Raven, he muttered. Yeah, that name's gonna stick. Hayes glanced at Ross. Think we'll ever see her again? Ross stared out the door at the fading tree line. I hope so, he said softly. But in his heart, he knew the truth. Some warriors weren't meant to be found. They were meant to be remembered.